Thank you again, everyone who's joining us today. Thank you for all of you who are joining us, and for those who are coming back from last week, welcome back. For our friends that are joining us for the first time, thank you for taking time out of this busy week already. It's only Tuesday to join us. We're gonna start in just 1 minute, but I wanna make sure that we're giving people a chance to join. And I have our amazing panelists, Dr. Sameera, Ahmed, and Dr. Ihsan Bagby, who do not need any introduction, but their bios will be linked in the chat. That will be joining us after a quick presentation of our research to provide further insight into today's topic. So, welcome. My name is Petra Alsoofy, and I am the Outreach and Partnerships Manager at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. Again, thank you so much for joining us today and the second webinar of the series, Reimagining Muslim Spaces, where we're providing research-based recommendations and expert opinions and recommendations to make sure that our mosques and our Islamic schools are creating welcome spaces when we reopen as institutions. I know everyone have been discussing how we reopen them safely in the current pandemic that we're all living in, but we wanna make sure that we're also including recommendations on how to make them inclusive and welcoming for groups of, especially for groups of people who have felt unwelcomed or that like they don't belong in American mosques. Today's format will do a very quick introduction of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, or for Social Policy and Understanding, excuse me, and a quick run through of this project and the recommendations we have. And then of course, we'll hand it over to our panelists, Dr. Ihsan Bagby, who study American mosques and have a wealth of information and knowledge. And he was the lead investigator in this project, Reimagining Muslim Spaces. And then Dr. Sameera Ahmed, who founded the Family and Youth Institute out of Michigan here, but they do their work all over the country and is a specialist in American Muslim youth, and have, again, a wealth of information and knowledge and recommendations that could be shared with the community. So for those who are not familiar with what we do at ISPU, the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding is a think tank located here or was founded here in Dearborn, Michigan, but it also have an office in Washington, D.C. And what we do is we provide objective research and education of American Muslims. Our goal is to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making about American Muslims. So whoever is making decision about American Muslims, whether within the community or outside of the community, we want to make sure that those decisions are well-informed and based on facts and data. We do that. We make an impact by discovering new facts. We do new research. We provide analysis, and then we seek helpful case studies. We look at what is being done right, whether in the American Muslim community or outside of the Muslim American community, and we make that available to the public and to decision makers, again, inside and outside of the Muslim American community. We educate the general public. So you'll see we have tons of information, infographic, webinars, videos on our website, and then of course, in-person events when those were permissible. And then the last thing we do is we equip leaders, like what we're doing today here, community leaders, media, nonprofit policymakers, and religious leaders who could make an impact and who could implement change in their institutions. As I mentioned, our research is focused on a couple of things. It's focused on the internal capacity building of the American Muslim community. We want American Muslims to look at their own spaces, their own institutions, their own issues, and make changes based on research and based on research backed information, and based on what is being done right. And we also provide a similar thing to those who are doing similar work in public policy or in the general public, because American Muslims are part of the narrative and part of the mosaic of this nation, and issues that impact us also impact other communities as well. So one of the projects we're talking about in the series is Reimagining Muslim Spaces, and it's focused specifically on American mosques. And some of the things that need to be addressed or could be changed in American mosques to be more inclusive, more welcoming of every member of the American Muslim community. But we're going to start with why mosques matter, right? We know mosques matter because that's where the community is created. A community is created around a mosque, and they're the places that provide spiritual guidance for members of the American Muslim community. But they also matter because research shows that they're very connected to better mental health, which is a huge topic that we are talking about in the time period we're living in. It's connected, or frequent mosque attendance is connected to more volunteerism, and that's again an issue that the American Muslim community is always talking about. And then in the years we're living in with a desire for better and higher civic engagement, frequent mosque attendance is actually linked to higher civic engagement. Okay. But also research show that mosques are often, unfortunately, alienated into many groups of people, especially women. We have a webinar coming on the 15th to talk about that topic. Converts, we addressed that topic last week, so you could see the recording on our YouTube channel. Young people, which we're discussing today, certain racial groups, we're talking about that on the 22nd, and many others. On the point where frequent mosque attendance is connected to civic engagement, I just wanted to show this very quick graph over here to show the different level of engagement, civic engagement in mosque attendance. And you'll see the light blue over here, occasional mosque attendance, and the darker blue is frequent mosque attendance. So you'll see frequent mosque attendance is actually connected to higher civic engagements, whether it's cooperating in the community, registering to vote, planning to vote in other ways to be civically engaged. There are many challenges that our mosques are facing, whether they're communicated through young adults in certain groups within the Muslim American community, or they're communicated through mosque leaders. So mosque leaders complain and tell or talk about the lack of volunteers, lack of volunteerism and commitment of mosque attendees. Young adults, women, and converts talk about feeling alienated and not feeling like they fit in that space or in certain mosques. And then there's a lack of sense of belonging in unity. And that's really important, especially in what we're living in today. I want to highlight very quickly to the attendees on why making mosque welcoming, why does it matter? Why do you have a stake in that? Why should that be a priority for mosque leaders or mosque attendees or people who are have a stake? Again, like I mentioned, increased volunteerism, sustained donors. Think about that in the change of the philanthropic scene in the American Muslim space right now. Increased cleanliness. We don't think about that, but that's a huge issue in a lot of mosques. Increase spiritual engagement, promote stronger, more vibrant communities. And then it builds a hub for hope. We have case studies on where mosques demonstrate that, where the mosque became more than just a place for prayer, but actually a place where centers for civic engagements were created, free health clinics were created, programs to reintroduce returning citizens to the community were created, and so forth. So if you're interested in that, you could check our case studies all on our website, ISPU.org. It provides a sanctuary for support in hostile environment. And we have been living, 2020 is a great example of a hostile environment and why mosques again matter in creating safe spaces. And then related to today's topic, it grows the next generation of American Muslims. This matter because you'll see later in the data that American Muslim community is the youngest faith community in the US. So what we're trying to do with this research project is we were developing a vision for the prophetic mosque as a guide and a goal, and then researching the situation in what is being done in institutions. I'll run through this very quickly because again, you could find it on our website. I want to make sure I'm giving our speakers more time. The goal again was to create welcoming, inclusive, engaging mosques and spaces, and creating hub of hope or resources of best practices that are being done, and communities could take that and replicate it. We're focusing on the welcoming, inclusive, engaging with these webinars, but again, you could look at the case studies and dive into the hub of hope. This project was accomplished through extensive literature review of not only Muslim spaces, but other faith communities, focus groups across the country, analysis of every available poll on American Muslims, one-on-one interviews, and then advice from diverse task force of experts, which you could find listed on our website. And then the result was a resource guide, a complete report that highlight not only the research finding, but recommendations, case studies, community toolkit that can be used and requested by mosques. It's available again for anyone to request it and start the process of implementing these recommendations in their own spaces. And then a link to a wealth of resources, not only from ISPU, from other practitioners as well. So very quickly, the American Muslim community is the youngest faith community. You'll see here 23% of American Muslims are between the age of 18 and 24. That's a huge number percent compared to other faith communities highlighted here. You'll see that American Muslims who are between 18 and 29, unlike the general public with the same age group, say their religion is very important to them. Actually, 91% of them say their faith is really important to them. In the general public, that with that same age group, only 56%. Okay, the difference is even though 91% say their faith is very important to them, not as many attend the mosque in that age group. And so what we have to ask is why? You'll also see here, Muslims in the US is the most ethnically diverse faith community. I show this graph even though the numbers are slightly outdated because I like how it highlights the different faith communities. 28% of Muslim community is identified as Black or African American, and you'll see here just a huge diversity compared to other faith communities. Something that's also unique to the American Muslims is 50% were born outside of the US and 50% were born in the US. However, 86% of American Muslims are American citizens. And then again, something that's unique to the American Muslim community is the high percentage of those who report at or below the poverty line. 35% report being at or below the poverty line. And again, all of these things that I mentioned when it comes to American Muslim youth is a huge intersection of different identities, which I'm sure Dr. Sameera Ahmed will highlight or talk about that a little bit more. So quick recommendations. I'm not going to spend time on this. I just want to highlight it quickly because I know Dr. Ihsan Bagby will dive into it a little bit more. But what American Muslim youth told us is they want mosques that are dynamic and relevant, okay? They want the khutbah or the talk that's given at the mosque to be relevant, to be dynamic, to relate to them and their issues, okay? They want mosques that are, or our recommendations invite people who could do that, okay? If it's not someone who's a permanent imam or a permanent khatib at the masjid, invite others to supplement. We put these nice infographics here to just show you these recommendations quickly. Organize young adult groups, give them space to build bond and friendship and to learn about their own faith within their own spiritual space. Include young adults in leadership for a couple reasons. One, you're creating a new talent for the future. Two, you are including their voices in the decisions that are being made in the mosque. Offer professional development resources. We're very fortunate in the Muslim American space because we have so many professionals, but at the same time, we also have a lot of people who don't have exposure to professionals and mentorship. So what a great way to build these networks. And in this country, just like anywhere else in the world, we know people advance based on who they know and based on their network and the mentorship they have been exposed to. So what a place to build that in our message, to build the community beyond just the prayer. Foster a family-friendly environment, just where we go pray 5 times a day and go home. It's a place where the community is being built. So young people need to be welcomed and included, and families need to be welcomed and included in the masjid. And then the last recommendation here is, again, we talk a lot about, you know, marriage problem in the American Muslim community. We talk about what need to be, what's halal and what's haram and what's right and what's wrong. And it depends on culture and a lot of other issues. But mosques are not at the forefront of creating a neutral and informal space for young people to meet and create those relationships in a healthy place. And many young people are not really interested in specialized marriage events. As many we plan in the community, not many are interested in them. And then be dynamic, clear, create a strategic plan and a clear mission of the mosque. Young adults are seeing the mosque as just any other organization. They need to know what is the purpose of this mosque. Make sure your mission is known. We put some of these recommendations to a test in a couple places, and this is all provided in the toolkit that you could access and implement in your own masjid. And the process takes between 6 months to a year, but it includes a pre-test, a post-test, and of course the recommendations. And some of the things that we found is respondents said, you know, in the past year, the masjid has transformed. The mosque have changed with a lot of many positive changes. Some of the top areas where we saw improvement, for example, in one of the mosques in Michigan, is the leaders in this masjid seem to care about me as a person. In this masjid, my opinion count, and the mission of this masjid make me feel my participation is important. Okay, and this is across age, class, gender, and race. Here are some next steps. We will include this in a follow-up email, but I want to open it up right now to our amazing panelists to just dive a little bit more into the topic. So I want to start with Dr. Sameera Ahmed. You saw the research on, you know, just how young the community is and some of the issues it faces. We also know that young American Muslims are also faced with bullying, racism, Islamophobia, and just a lot of other issues. But they say the religion is very important to them. Okay, so as the founder of the Family and Youth Institute, Muslim youth are a huge part of our focus or of your focus, and of course our focus as well. What are some of the challenges that Muslim youth are facing, and what role should the mosque play in the lives of young Muslims?
Sure. First of all, thank you, ISPU, for inviting me and having these conversations. And it is an honor to be on this panel with Dr. Bagby. He was an inspiration, one of many inspirations for me to go into this field and really study the Muslim community. So thank you very much, and it's truly an honor. Now, getting to your question, I think one of the things that you meant, we found in the study was the fact that Muslim youth indicated they express that their faith was important, but at the same time, you didn't see that mosque attendance. And what we need to acknowledge that, first of all, in this age period, which is referred to as emerging adult time period, this is a time period which is for across faiths, there's a lot of kind of trying to figure out who they are and increasing their understanding of who they are. And so what we're seeing with young people is, in addition to that kind of identity exploration, they're experiencing messages from mass media, pop culture, and oftentimes these negative messaging is negative towards religious institutions and faith. So it's no longer cool to be practicing whatever faith. And so our young people are absorbing these messages. And so when they are hearing and seeing these negative messages about faith and practice of faith, be it it's backward, it's not a place for intellectual growth, and then they're actually seeing it in the masajid, I think what happens for young people is they hear it and they see it and they decide to check out. And I think that's one of the things that we need to recognize, that this process is happening, and really thinking about making sure that, one, we understand what these challenges are, and two, really work towards having more inclusive mosque communities. And I'm really excited about this conversation that we're having today. And so thank you for starting us out. So in terms of the challenges that we want to think about, the first thing I think, and you mentioned earlier, Petra, was to recognize the fact that there is no monolith of what a Muslim youth is, right? Young people, as well as everyone, we have many different social identities. And our experiences with being being Muslim and young really depends on those social identities. Being, in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic background, in terms of are we documented or undocumented. All of these factors really have an impact on what it means to be a Muslim youth. And so mosques need to really think about that, looking at who is attending, who is in their community, and be responsive to those needs, right? And so when we think about, again, there's no way to address everyone's needs, but I just want to highlight a few areas for us to consider, right? So one area would be in terms of really thinking about Islamophobia and really thinking about how does anti-Muslim hate impact individuals who may be visibly Muslim, particularly women, right? And so being a young female who may be wearing hijab in a high school, whether it's going to be very different if you're in Dearborn versus if you're in Arkansas, right? And so the mosques need to really think about what does that look like and how do we be responsive. And so part of that would be to make sure that you use available resources that are present. It's really important that parents are equipped to really know how to talk to their kids, because oftentimes kids don't tell their parents until it's really bad. So really talk about bullying that's maybe happening in school, in the hallways, in classrooms, etc. And really having masajid to be really involved in addressing these issues with schools, providing the resources for parents. And so I would highlight a couple of resources for people to consider. I know both the FYI and ISPU both have research reports on this topic. Use those. We have, FYI also has some videos to help parents as well as teachers. So again, there are tons of different resources that we have available that can empower masajid, right? And so use these resources to address that issue. A second area that we need to really be serious about is really addressing racism in our communities. Again, 1/3 of our community is Black, right? And so the issue of racism is both an interpersonal issue, one-on-one, and it's also a structural issue that we also need to address. And if we as a community, as a masjid, are not addressing or talking about educational and health disparities that exist, not talking about school to prison pipeline, policing, not really having deep, meaningful conversations beyond 1 or 2 webinars when an incident happened, young people are going to notice that. Right? Young people see, and if I'm Black and Muslim, and I'm seeing, and I'm in an immigrant masjid, and I'm seeing that my issues are not everyday issues. People are not making dua, at Jummah or in Tarawih, or they're not discussing what matters to me in my life. That's resulting in a feeling of erasure. And so they will check out. So recognize that the issue of race is extremely important and impacts 1/3 of our community. And if we're not doing anything about that as a community, we're telling them that they don't matter, no matter how many webinars we have on this topic. So really addressing the issue of racism in a more meaningful way, and for particularly immigrant mosques, one of the hardest things that I'm seeing happening is we can talk a lot about racism, but it's really hard for us to notice the racism that we have within our veins, right? We absorb so much from our society, and there's so much racism there that we don't recognize how many of our behaviors are has internalized the colonialism, the years of colonialism from our countries of origin, the white supremacy that's experienced within our society, and we really struggle. And so as a mosque, we need to be able to look at the mirror, acknowledge that, and do something about it in a consistent manner over time. And I think when we start seeing that, not only will Black Muslim youth respond favorably, but so will many of the immigrant youth, and really helping to mentor young people to have those conversations. And so when we're talking about race, in addition to that, it's really important that Muslim youth have those conversations. Black Muslim youth in particular have safe spaces where they can be both Black and Muslim. So really Black Muslim spaces are really important. And I urge people to follow the work of Dr. Camille Rashad at the Muslim Wellness. They're doing phenomenal work, and they have a number of programs. So that would be the second thing I would say that really is important for us to consider. The third thing that is increasingly becoming more evident is the importance of mental health for Muslim youth. What we're seeing as we're going out to the communities prior to the pandemic is every place we would go talking about different topics, mental health would come up. And so one of the things is to really understand what is going on in terms of Muslim youth, in terms of the different sources of stress. Recognize that anxiety and depression is prevalent, and that is resulting in eating disorders. Depression is resulting in young people having suicidal ideation, really thinking about, what do you have in place as a masjid to have those important conversations? Are your peer mentors trained? Do you have a system set up within your mosque where if a young person is struggling, they can be connected to a mental health provider? Do we have the information available on the website? Do we have posters available in the masjid that talk about mental health? Are we addressing it in our khutbahs? These are all, when we have as a mosque, have these resources available, young people are able to get more help. And one of the things that tomorrow we'll be talking on ISPU'S hosting me for a Scholars Wisdom Wednesday, and we'll be talking more about how to do this within the community. So I'll leave that there and won't discuss more, but to recognize that we need to take a role because that has an impact on young people. So in addition to that, I would like to probably add two other factors that kind of serves as a challenge for young people. And that would be parents. We as parents, we often, we love our kids, but we're not intentional about our parenting. And so while we may be present, we're not fully present. We're often on our devices. And when we're on our devices, we're not necessarily connecting emotionally with our children. And what we fail to realize is that we are the #1 protective factor for our kids. More than any other factor in the world, money, neighborhood, more than anything. If we have a strong emotional connection with our kids, we can make miracles happen. And so really thinking about, as mosque, if we know that this is a protective factor, what are we doing to support our families? What are we doing to really promote the skill building for parenting in terms of communication skills, in terms of activities, really helping develop those positive relationships? Our activities, men on one side, women on the other side, and then young people separated by gender as well? Or are we showing and modeling positive families? Many of us aren't doing, and many of our mosques don't do that. And so really being able to provide that. And so those are kind of general ideas of type of programming that may be impacting young people. But in terms of actual youth programming, there are a couple of things that we also need to think about. One of the things that massages tend to do is just have a youth group, right, or a youth department. And we need to expand how we think about promoting youth to, in addition, having a youth group and youth program, to really have a family department. And really think about, in addition to youth programming, what are we doing to strengthen family skills, like I just mentioned? What are we doing to strengthen our marriages? Because if you have strong marriages, parents will have a more likelihood to be on the same page and have conversations about parenting, which will then help promote youth development, right? And so really thinking about promoting youth, not just from a youth group perspective. Secondly, to really think about how are we creating communities that care? Do young people feel like they matter? that their presence is helpful or not helpful? Do we have a understanding where they feel that it's strength-based, where young people are creating, feeling empowered to provide solutions, give ideas, to have their own space? Do we have that, right? So really it's important that we also have youth empowering programs and environment. We also need to recognize that not all mosques will have the resources to have all these types of programs. So are we connected to other programs, events where we can have that kind of collaborative environment, caring environment that they can benefit from? It could be the mosque across town. It could be, you know, attending a convention where people are being able to see all sorts of Muslims and all sorts of speakers that you can never afford bring to the masjid in a smaller community. So really being thoughtful about what does it mean to be your mosque if you're in a smaller community versus a larger community, if you have more resources versus less resources. So really think about that. So in addition to having a collaborative, connected environment where you're connecting with other organizations, other masajids, really having a youth empowering program, one of the key factors is having positive relationships. Does the young person feel loved by their mentors, by the masjid auntie or uncle, by the imam? Are they excited? Do they feel loved by them? Or are those, I've been at some mosques where they look at the young people and they're like, that person's gonna break the window of our mosque because you're playing soccer in the parking lot. Right? That's a problem because then you're pushing young people away. And so it's really important that we cultivate these positive relationships and that love to them, and that love and the connection to the masjid. Another thing oftentimes is, as mosques, we tend to want to do a program, yalla, let's do the program, and we do it. But what's the goal of the program? Do we have clear goals? Do we have clear evaluation of, did we achieve what we're looking for, or did we just do an activity for the sake of doing it? So really making sure that we have those clear goals, we're evaluating it, and really think about how can we improve. And really it's important to get young people's feedback in the process, and they should be leading some of the evaluation. It should be co-leading. And then finally, really it's important for us to take kind of a multi-method approach where we're segmenting our programming. So not everyone is going to be into sports, but some young people are going to really need sports to connect to the masjid. So you have different programming for them. Some people are going to be really interested in the arts. So are you cultivating that skill and that ability for that person? Again, somebody may be more into intellectual, scholarly reading. So what programs are we offering for the different types of young people? And think about that in terms of, are we meeting the needs of all of our young people? And if not, they're gonna go someplace else to get those needs met. And I think as a community, we can't expect young people to attend a halaqah and attend sports and, you know, and in order to be accepted in the community. We need to be flexible. Some young people will be able to do all, but some will not be interested and not engaged. And we need to accept them and meet them where they're at, develop that connection and build them up. And so I think these are just some ideas that, you know, we can help start the conversation with, and then I'll pass it on over to Dr. Bagby to share some
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed,
additional thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for sharing with us. As I said, wealth of knowledge and information, and there's a lot more to come. Dr. Bagby, I want to ask you, you're the principal investigator on this project, and you study American mosques, so you've probably seen it all. The question for you is, what is the most important part of the recommendations that we talked about or we didn't mention that you think mosque leaders can implement to keep young Muslims engaged? And then what are some examples that you have seen in American mosques succeeding and engaging young adults? So if you could share with us some of that information.
Thank you for having me. And a big shout out to Dr. Sameera Ahmed. MashaAllah, good to see you, Sameera. May Allah bless all your efforts. You're doing a great job. MashaAllah. So, we did this, big research project. Part of it focused on young adults. And let's make sure we understand the historical significance. What I say is that historically we're in the kind of third era of Islam in America. We had the era of African Muslims, enslaved African Muslims. We had the era of early immigrants, turn of the century, in the 20th century, 1900s. And then we have this era starting around the 1960s. And the danger to any cultural group is when generations change. So Islam did not survive the third generation among African Muslims. For the most part, Islam did not survive past the third generation of immigrant Muslims who came early in the early 1900s. To a certain extent, yes, but overall, no. So we must recognize that we are starting the transition to the third generation. The pioneers like me, gray, getting old. I'm sorry, Sameera, I'm on my way out. Petra and Sameera, it's going to be your day. It's going to be your day. And so the issue of young adults is critical for the future. I hang out with researchers, and among Christians and Jews, they're tearing their hair out. They are in mourning because their young adults have no interest, for the most part. Their young adults do not have interest in their religious organizations. And we're doing great. But you know what they tell me? Wait, just wait. You'll be just like us. We'll give you a few decades because you are a newer immigrant group, a newer convert group. In other words, like myself, I converted in the 60s. So I have grandchildren, but they're all young. And so, we're both a young convert and a young immigrant community. So my whole point is simply, this is a critical issue, and our masjids are not giving due importance to it. So let's talk about, you went over some of the recommendations. Let me just give a few kind of a little bit more meat to those bones. But let me just say first, the very first thing that a masjid should do is to be intentional about the issue of inclusivity. And that includes not only young adults, but women. It includes African Americans and people who are not part of the major cultural group, right? And that depends, a dominant Arab masjid, their issues is with other Pakistanis maybe. A dominant Indo-Pak community is the issue of other Arabs or, so what I recommend, and actually this is not part of our, recommendations, masjids should appoint somebody to focus on this issue. I would call it a director of inclusivity, director of inclusion. And it's this person who is going to make intentional the efforts of the masjid to make sure that those groups who might feel somewhat alienated, to make sure they're included. Because a young adult that walks in to a masjid and all the uncles and aunties, they might not feel as comfortable. Women, African American, and other cultural groups, the same thing. So there needs to be intentionality, and the best way is to put somebody in charge. And that person would engage in conversation with the different groups that need efforts to be included. And of course, now in this issue of racism in this country, it includes African Americans. You know, when I first started studying masjids, and you know, we're in the midst of another decade survey. And, you know, in 2000 and 2010, I touted loudly how, you know, we are a very diverse community. And I think in our study, about 85% of every masjid in America had some African Americans attending, right? I don't think that's true. I think the numbers are going down. I don't see, I might be wrong because we're right in the middle of this study, but my anecdotal sense is that the percentage of African Americans that are attending other masjids is decreasing. I think over time, they've just got fed up, and after a while, you just, you know, you can no longer do it. You know you're supposed to. I mean, Islamically, you know, we're one people, you know, one community, but after a while, you kind of just give up. And by the way, I think the same challenge is for young adults. When are they going to give up, right? When are women who do not feel exactly comfortable, when do they give up? Right now, they have not given up. So anyway, we need somebody who's going to be in charge of dialoguing with young adults. So the first task, the first recommendation is listening. Masjids have to sit down with young adults and the other groups within the masjid and listen, identify their interests, identify their points of views, and then facilitate the masjid addressing, dealing with, empowering those groups, here we're talking about young adults, in realizing their interests, so forth. So the first thing is to listen. The second recommendation is to identify some young adults who might be the center for organizing young adult groups, the organized small groups around friendships, interests. And the key is that many masjids feel that everything has to be controlled by them, has to be controlled by the leadership. And so many masjids, their first reaction is, whoa, we can't just let anybody get together and, you know, if this is going to be something with the masjid, we just can't let them go. But no, this is a bad attitude. You have to give our young adults, and by the way, the young adults as defined in our group follow basically the Pew definition, which is 18 to 34. So it's from college age, a young professional, just getting established, new family, that type of thing. So, you know, young adults need to get involved, and best that they get involved in small groups of themselves, or maybe even a large group, but it's much easier to organize small groups. And the third thing is, you know, they need to hear khutbahs, that was mentioned, right? We need to get young adults, whether within the community or outside the community, to give khutbah on a regular basis. Again, intentionality. A young adult, when they walk into the masjid on Friday, they need to hear or see a face and hear a voice that's like them. The fourth thing is getting young adults in leadership. And that means nurturing. You have to nurture people. And don't think just putting one adult on the board is the answer. That's called tokenism. And I've talked to many masjid, you know, just putting that one adult, and then they get totally alienated and, you know, totally turned off when they hear all the uncles and all of their discussions that, you know, and arguments and fights that don't make a lot of sense to them. So there really has to be, again, intentionality of a masjid saying we need to have a joint leadership of the pioneers and the young adults. Young adults need to respect the pioneers, and the pioneers need to respect the young adults. It's the collaboration that I think will mean success for our community. A few other points real quick. The idea of a family-friendly masjid, that means making sure you have babysitting. You know, it's a big turnoff for young mothers when, you know, they have their kids and they just don't fit in anywhere. It's always a hassle. Mom's Day Out, Mom's Night Out, a good program. And let me mention lastly, I'm taking too much time, but marriage, facilitating marriage for young adult Muslims. For many of them, the majority of them are pushing off marriage. And part of it is, you know, I'm a convert, so I don't come from kind of an immigrant community, but I've had enough discussion to know that marriage is difficult. And masjids need to build a culture where marriage is not so difficult. And that starts from the minbar, but also a culture that, you know, high dowries and high expectations are, you know, should not be the custom. We need to fight against this. And also we need to give opportunities for young people to meet one another, male and females. They get to know one another. These marriage events, our research to these marriage events don't work. And they're not the answer. You know, I don't know, you know, speed dating and whatever, you know, marriage events. And then the openness for people to marriage cross culture. Young adults going to college are exposed to people from all different cultures, but many parents are still stuck in, we want, you know, our daughter, our son to marry somebody from our culture. And of course, the whole racism thing is even another factor of not only having somebody marry within your culture, but marry somebody of another racial background. I'll stop there. Sorry for taking so long, Petra.
No, thank you, both of you. This is wonderful information, and we have 2 questions. Feel free to answer whichever you like. The first one, we did talk a lot about it, but the question is asking, are there any practical steps that or ideas we can implement to get people into the mosque? So this individual is talking about the young people are not even in the mosque. So what kind of programming, aside from halaqas, that can be done in the masjid to get the young people in? And then the second question is, a lot of young, second and third generation young adults have been trying with the same mosque or have been attending in the same mosque for many years. At what point do you think we should start building our own community centers and mosques that actually serve our needs? So whoever wants to go first, feel free.
Let me just start by saying that it is, I think, a mistake. It is incorrect to think that young adults are not present in mosque. Even though, actually the Pew figures for young adult attendance in mosque is, yes, slightly lower, but not significantly, even statistically significantly lower than other age groups. In almost every mosque, there are young adults. There are young adults. Many of them, though, attend just Juma prayer and they don't see any other avenues. So you have young adults, the task, the challenge is to integrating them. And so I've outlined some specific things. You need to start a dialogue. You need to start listening. You need to start identifying those few young adults who are ready to get to work to organize young adult groups. You need to make sure you get buzz of young adults. You need to be sensitive to young families and making sure you're serving young families. So these are all specific recommendations.
Just want to add a couple comments in terms of the individual talking about the fact that they're having a hard time getting people to the masjid, the young people. I think one of the questions you'd want to know, just in addition to what Dr. Bagby was saying, was what's preventing them right now? What are the barriers? Are these barriers kind of social cultural barriers in which we need to address that? Are there barriers in terms of transportation, getting to the masjid? Maybe they're part of the MSA and the MSA on campus is really far from the masjid. So then transportation is an issue. Is it a matter of relevance? And if it is relevance, what do we need to do to be more relevant in terms of programming? Maybe they need mentorship in terms of career mentoring. And recognize that while we may offer resources or programming at the masjid, recognize what's in the bigger, larger context. Can they get something better someplace else? And if so, we need to figure out what is the mosque's niche, right? What do we offer that nobody else can offer, and really provide that in a way that's relevant and meaningful. And for young people, maybe that's just food. Food is good, and that will bring people to, right? And so really think about what does the unique group that you're working with, what do they want and need, and what is relevant? The second question, I think, was really talking about, okay, what if you do have young people and they want to get involved, but things are not changing? Part of it is also really thinking about, if you already had these conversations and if you've kind of identified what needs to change and that change is not happening, to really understand from a third party perhaps, what is preventing the elders from letting go? Is it the fear? Is it the lack of not being able to recognize how they're being destructive and not creating space and having a conversation about that? Is it they're not allowing for programming that's important for young people, and so you have to go someplace else? What are those barriers? And are there ways to address those barriers through the mosque? And if not, okay, you do a third space, but then what's the transition plan back? Because while third spaces are important and relevant for young people to kind of find agency, find their voice, because what happens is, you graduate, if you're connected to the mosque, you go to college, you're able to be active in the MSA, and then there's no place to go until you have kids, and the kids go to maybe Sunday school or Islamic school. And that's a good 10, 15 years that is kind of like, you don't know what's going on, you don't have any community. Now, if you have this third space, that's what happens with that third space. You don't have the wisdom of some of the elders. You don't have the resources. You don't have the mentoring. And so while they're good to address the immediate need for social connection, what is the long-term plan for transitioning back to the masjid? And so really thinking about that.
Thank you both so much. So we have about 5 minutes, but this question I feel is very important. Can you share success stories of mosques or centers where they have implemented successfully programs for young adults or incorporated young adults into the mosque community?
There are a few that have been intentional about including young adults and have been successful. I think Adams Center in DC is just one that comes to mind. They have, a cadre of young adults in leadership positions, programs, small groups where young adults, and also for seniors, by the way. Yeah, hey, don't forget about the seniors, you know. But, and it shows you the fact that they have a seniors program is the sensitivity that we need to include and address the interests of people throughout the community. We need, I must, you help us out. We need more literature on best practices revolving around inclusivity in masjids. You know, we don't have a wealth of literature about best practices.
I think it's also important to not take a cookie cutter approach, right? So everyone has to look at their community and what's in their surrounding, what they're capable of, and what else can they do. And, you know, alhamdulillah, when you look at Adam Center, they're doing amazing stuff and they're being very intentional about what they do, how they do it, with whom and how, right? They have the resources, they're in a big city, but what do you do if you're in a smaller city? And you don't have as many resources, being able to pull in speakers, having a large Muslim community. And I think those are the questions you really want to think about is, what can we do for our community and our people? And how can we leverage the other resources around us, be it Muslim or non-Muslim? And so, you know, a lot of different communities can use mentoring training from outside organizations. I know the FYI, that Family and Youth Institute where I work, we do it. A lot of local YMCAs may have training, same with mental health. So there are all of these trainings that are available either online before the pandemic and will be after the pandemic available in person, but you can use all those resources. Secondly, use the energy and talent of young people. One of the really good examples of having youth-led programming is MINA, Muslim Youth in North America. They have been effective in really helping mentoring young people in high school age. Mass Youth has been very effective in the college age, emerging adult youth, having a Tarbiyah program to really help engage them and connect young people from the MSA back into the community. And so see if you can leverage those camps, programs, halaqat to connect people from that perspective if we're not able to connect them in your own masjid. And then activities and social events. And so some of the massages, there was a great program at one of the mosques in Columbus where they had a Fajr program, which surprisingly in the summertime really galvanized the young people and got them to the masjid. Really think of, hear about different stories, go to the different conferences and conventions, hear about what other people are doing. Those are ideas that you can then take and adapt to your specific community reality.
Thank you both so much for this wonderful information that we shared. We're getting a lot of good comments thanking us. There was a quick question about cancel culture, but we're going to save it for the next webinar because of the sake of time. I want to be respectful of your time and the attendees' time. Again, thank you to Dr. Sameera Ahmed and Dr. Ihsan Bagby for the information you shared with us. And the information you shared that will be included in the follow-up email that will go out to all who register for the webinar, as well as the recording of this webinar. Please share in your network. We know that not all mosque leaders were attending this webinar, and we know they all have issues with making a more inclusive mosque for young adults. Please share it with your network. You are the voice that will carry this message to those who are not able to join us. Again, join us next week as we discuss how we create more welcoming mosque for women. And then the week after that, we will be discussing getting race right in the American Muslim community. Thank you again to our speakers, to our attendees, and inshallah, we'll see you next week.